Video recordings of this podcast can be found on raisingequity.org and Truth to Power on YouTube.
Welcome to Raising Equity. I'm Kira Hudson-Banks, and today we are at Uzazi Village. And I'm really excited to sit down and speak with the founder, Hakima Tafunzi Payne. And Uzazi Village, well, I'll let her tell you about it. It's an amazing space that centers Black and Brown mothers, babies, families. And it's so necessary given the disparities that we have in terms of maternal child health.
It gets its own organization. But yes, they are similar in that we both do maternal infant health work and we do partner on projects.
And just the fact that you're focused on Black women
Yes.
is important,
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, it is. It's critical.
It is.
And we're unabashed about that.
And that's essential because we haven't.
And we've both taken heat for that. So this is our clinic. This is the Item 8 clinic. It was completed about 2 weeks ago, and it's not complete.
Oh, that's exciting.
We're still painting. We're still getting furniture delivered. But this is our lactation room. So we already had a breastfeeding clinic going. So we see breastfeeding moms. We run a walking clinic. We have lactation consultants and breastfeeding educators, and I'm a nurse. And so this is where we do all our breastfeeding magic in here. We built out, it was just a big concrete warehouse.
Okay.
And so I worked with the architects to design the space, and then they just finished building it out. So a group had a meeting here, so all the doors are closed and locked because they had toddlers. It was a allegedly group. So that'll be exam room number 1. For prenatal care.
What?
This is
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thanks.
And I know
a dream come true, trust me. Just to come here and run a infant loss support group and a postpartum depression group. So we'll have both those groups. And then we have a family and marriage therapist. Here.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of ritual, a lot of moon fires, full moon fires and things around the fire pit. So earlier, this past fall, we had a trauma release ceremony around the fire pit, just for Black women. And we invited women who had trauma around birth or sexuality to come and release.
So welcome. Thank you so much for meeting with me, Hakima.
Thank you, Kara. Thanks for having me on your show. It's a real honor and a delight, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I gave a little bit about Uzazi Village. Maybe you could tell folks about all the services that you offer and help remind them why, right? Like why we need this race-specific space because of the disparities.
So, Uzazi Village is a sacred Black space, and it is space that is dedicated in its focus on maternal infant health in the African American community because of the racially based disparities in perinatal health outcomes that we see in our community. So the higher death rates for Black infants, higher rates of morbidity and mortality for Black mothers. Those statistics are out there and they're touted a lot, and we don't so much like to focus on those stats as we do focusing on solutions. So that's what we're about here. We're about supporting the village, creating a supportive village around the childbearing family, and providing culturally specific support around those families and services that support those families. So to that end, to answer Kira's question, we do a lot of different things here. We have a few basic services. We have a clothing closet that's open to the public a couple of days a month We have a diaper depot, so folks can come and get diapers. They can get baby clothes. We have a limited amount of baby furniture or supplies, things like strollers and car seats. And we also offer services that folks may not know about as readily, such as our breastfeeding clinic, which most of the hospitals will refer women to our breastfeeding clinic, and other services such as our nursing bras. We have a nursing bra service. They're donated to us, and we have bra fitters on our staff that can fit women for nursing bras. We also have a plethora of classes, so all kinds of classes related to childbearing. We have our childbirth series. We're developing a culturally specific course for natural family planning that's specific to African American women. But otherwise, we have breastfeeding classes, newborn care classes, baby wearing classes. So
you all really offer it all. It seems like the focus, like you said, is not just on prenatal care, not just on labor and delivery, and not just on postpartum, but across the spectrum. And that it sounds like you're focusing on supports postpartum. And before
Right.
I hear you saying you don't want to just belabor the stats. And I think that's important because it's coming from a strengths-based perspective to say
Yes.
we can offer solutions. There are things we can do. And I also want to just highlight, I think sometimes people make the assumption that these outcomes are because of class or education.
They do make that
They
assumption.
do. And I just want to make clear and reiterate that across socioeconomic status, education, Black women are at increased risk for preterm labor,
Yes.
for morbidity during labor and delivery.
Yes.
Their children are at increased risk for all sorts of difficulties that come along with being born early and
Right.
preterm.
Right.
And I use myself as an example sometimes. I have a PhD. I have a lot of privilege. And I still, when I had my two children, was at that increased risk. So I just want to push that because people often think about it as helping people who are less than or have unfortunate circumstances. No, this is something that has to do with race and the environment of racism that we have in our society and in our medical system.
And that's a stereotype that I have to push back against all the time. I do a lot of work in the community. Once I step outside the doors of this sacred space, and I'm working with hospitals and other healthcare and social service related agencies in the community, that's often a belief that I have to push through, is to help people understand that no, this is not socioeconomic, that it is racially based, and that, yes, Black women across the economic spectrum are still affected by these stats. And so we have to look at it through that lens.
And I appreciate you taking that focus at Uzazi Village. That's something that excited me when I learned about your work, because some people are scared and shy away from taking that race-focused, race-specific approach. And the reality is we've had these infant mortality rates and disparities and maternal health disparities, and we haven't had a race-focused approach, and we haven't improved the stats.
Right.
So why not? Why not try a race-focused approach? And so I appreciate you being at the forefront of that work that can give other people the courage to step out and say, yeah, when we see these disparities, we need to see race and be focused on race-specific outcomes.
Well, we absolutely must. You're using the right terminology. We must, because one, this is not new. It's been this way for a very long time. And in fact, not only is it not new, it's actually getting worse. And when we don't take a racially based focus, what happens is that our data, the data for Black mothers, Black infants, gets lost in the aggregate data. And if you don't pull your data out by race, then you don't get a clear picture of what's going on. It's easy not to see the problem because often in cities and a lot of places I travel to speak across the country, I always ask them, pull out your data. I want to see your local data. And if they aren't looking at their data properly, it's easy to lose African American mothers because often in a lot of places our population isn't big enough to see what's happening, and if those municipalities aren't looking at their data by race, then it's easy to miss the problem.
Yes, disaggregating data by race is necessary, and it gets us beyond just having programs that address the disparities, but we start to then see the systems and how the outcomes vary by the different.
And sometimes
systems.
Even pulling it out by race isn't enough. You can't lump African Americans in with foreign-born Africans.
Right.
And so you can't just even lump all Black folks together. You still have to pull out African Americans and look at their data separately.
Well, and did you see there was some research to suggest that first generation, you need to make that difference. But as people who are foreign born Black come to the United States, by the second generation, their outcomes are just as bad as ours.
Which tells you something about
absolutely
socialization into this culture, right?
Yeah.
That sort of tells the story.
It does. So what have you learned in your work that other people need to know? What do you think other spaces that are concerned about maternal child health need to be doing differently?
So there are a couple of things, because I feel like I'm in a space right now. Uzazi Village is 6 years old now, about to celebrate its 6th birthday. And there are a couple of things I've learned. One, that we really need to focus on the postpartum area, that families, but specifically postpartum women, are largely abandoned after the birth of the baby, which is the time really where they need the greatest support. And we're largely abandoning women in the postpartum arena, and we're seeing a lot of women slip through the cracks, both with mental health, which is your area of expertise, but also physical wear and tear. This is a time they're supposed to be recuperating from birth. A lot of people don't realize. My background is nursing. I'm an obstetrical nurse. It takes about a full 2 years to recover from childbirth, to fully recover. Yeah, you can be back on your feet and back to your normal activities in about 2 weeks, but it takes about 2 years for the body to reset, to go back to its pre-pregnancy state. And women are really asked to sort of jump back into their normal lives without a decent or respectable recovery period, and that's not okay.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I felt that after having my children and ended up seeking out physical therapy, and it was extremely helpful. And I wondered why all women aren't referred. Why all women aren't referred to physical therapy, because your body goes through a lot.
It does.
And I appreciate you just sharing that. And it's important for people to hear that it takes time for your body to heal.
It really does. And in our doula class, which I didn't mention, our biggest program here at Uzazi Village is our sister doula program. We run a community-based doula program that pairs childbearing families with our doulas. We train and then support doulas to go out and work with families in the community. And when I'm training my doulas, we put a lot of emphasis on the postpartum period, that the care that they give, the home visits that they do, the following up, the checking on the mom, the taking meals to her, making sure that she has created a support system around herself, making sure that others are looking in on her. Those kinds of practices are really important, making sure she has the resources she needs, that she can access the services she needs. Those and the breastfeeding support, just on and on and on. Our sister doulas are trained to come around the family in the postpartum and to keep providing support in that period when everyone else sort of takes a step back.
And I think it's important to highlight the postpartum doulas. Oftentimes if people know about doulas, they think about them in terms of labor and delivery and birthing.
Right.
And so to remind folks that there are folks who specialize in postpartum support. And so it might be worth thinking about having a doula that either can be with you throughout and after, or if not, finding a postpartum doula.
And that's so true. And people are often puzzled and say, well, what does a postpartum doula do? And they confuse it with the role of a nanny or a babysitter. But the postpartum doula actually isn't there for the infant. The postpartum doula is there for the mother or the new parents.
Yes.
And she supports them in their role and supports the healing and the recuperation of the childbearing person. So the postpartum doula will assist with breastfeeding for sure, make sure the mother's physical needs are met for rest and recuperation, make sure that there's meals available, good food available, that if there are services and resources needed, that those are brought to bear. If the mother needs a more supportive team around her, then the doula can galvanize that support. She can help the mother navigate her way through healthcare services if more healthcare services are needed, especially in the mental health arena. Because mental health in the postpartum period is often not attended to at all.
Yeah. It's an important position.
Yes.
And so if you don't have a village of women or people in your life that can do that, I would encourage people to seek out a postpartum doula that's sole purpose is to focus, like you said, on the well-being of the person who just gave birth.
And our postpartum doulas have a lot of specialized knowledge and a lot of body care practices that have fallen by the wayside that are really important in the postpartum period. Things like belly binding and yoni steaming and care of the lactating breast, special massage techniques, meditation, the use of herbal remedies. There's all kinds of ways that the postpartum doula really jumps in and caretakes the postpartum body.
Now,
really mothers the mother. Really.
Yeah. Now, what about some of the things I remember hearing from my grandmother? Like, don't walk up and down stairs for so many weeks. Don't wash your hair for so much time. Like some of those things that you hear were passed down from mother to mother.
So some of those may fall into the arena of old wives' tale, such as washing the hair. But the up and down the stairs is really true. As a nurse, I admonish folks on that one all the time. It really does. It fatigues the body when the body should be resting, and it can often when I see a resurgence of bleeding in a postpartum woman, when her bleeding is tapered off and then there's a resurgence of the bleeding, I almost always peg that she has stairs in her house because she's up and down the stairs too much. Yep.
Yeah.
She's doing too much.
Yeah. Well, I want to also get a chance to talk about not only the great work that you're doing at Uzazi Village, but you're also tackling larger systemic problems. You're in medical schools trying to reshape medical education. I read that you were just invited to be a delegate at the Birthing Summit.
Yes.
Tell us about some of that systems level work that you're doing.
That is my system level work. And it also answers your original question back to part of the lessons learned. So lessons learned in my 6 years of working with Uzazi Village as its executive director is 1, more emphasis on the postpartum period. 2, we really need to do the systemic work around anti-racism in healthcare. And so that's why I set myself to do the systemic work. Yes, we need to work in community and create safe community spaces. Yes, we need to work with individual families and bolster the capacity and the resources of individual families like we do with our sister doulas. So we work on that individual level, we work on that community level, but we also need to be working on that systems level. So we, to that end, there is some national work that I do or regional work that I do, and that is focused around anti-racism training. I am an anti-racism trainer. And the more I do this work around health disparities, the more I see anti-racism as an absolutely necessary element. We can do all the work we want on the back end with healing modalities and focusing on healing people of their traumas. But if you don't move upstream and focus on what is causing the trauma, you'll always be too busy at the back end, healing people who are hurting. And so that's why I'm so committed to my systemic work in anti-racism, because that's the upstream work where I'm really focused at what's at the core of these health disparities.
Yeah, the root cause.
Yes.
Can you give a story, give an example of how you have seen racism impact maternal or child health? That might feel abstract to some folks.
Oh, so many ways. And I get why it seems really abstract, because we think of our healthcare system as altruistic. It is not. It is a business. And we think of doctors and nurses as altruistic. And while I agree, there is altruism there, they are humans. And as human beings, they are subject to some of the same concerns that we all hold as members of this specific culture. And in American culture, racism is highly enculturated, and racial identity is highly enculturated. And what I've learned as an anti-racism training is that implicit bias is a part and parcel of the human experience. It's not pointing fingers, it's not laying blame, that we all have implicit bias or unconscious biases. We all favor one group over another. We all have beliefs that we were socialized to have, whether we're aware of those beliefs and how they influence our actions or not. And so the work that I do is really about heightening our awareness of our biases and how they manifest in the healthcare environment specifically. And so what I tell folks is that you don't have to be a racist person to have a racist impact. And you see this a lot in healthcare, because so much of the bias in healthcare is embedded in policy. So you don't have to, be a doctor or nurse at home saying, I'm getting ready for work. Let's see who I can go oppress today. It doesn't quite work like that. It's not that folks have an intention to have a racist impact. It's that the policies in their workplace hold bias that are going to have a negative impact on folks of color, particularly African Americans. So my best example of that and how that works is drug testing of pregnant individuals. So there are ways, if you so choose to drug test pregnant individuals, there is an ethical way to do that, and that would be to drug test everyone, to just across the board have a policy to drug test everyone who walks through your door. But hospitals never do it that way. I've never seen a hospital do it that way. They drug test by criteria, and the bias is embedded in the criteria. So you don't have to be a racist person to have a racist impact in that situation. You just have to be the healthcare provider employed by that facility that has a policy with biased criteria that's
Disproportionately, they're
that is
testing.
disproportionately going to capture African Americans because of the criteria that they use. And so it has nothing to do with your beliefs or what you're trying to do. You're just doing your job. You're just following the policy. So sometimes that's referred to as racism without the racist. And healthcare is chock full of those. And so folks need to understand that that's a place for them to begin. Yes, they need to look at their own attitudes and examine their own personal biases, but they also need to very closely examine their policies and procedures in their facilities to see where the bias sneaks in, because it's in and through everything.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. There's a both and, right? You talked about unconscious bias, and the research would suggest that we are most at risk of playing out our in-group biases. So people who are like us.
Right.
And so that can come out in the medical care too. That someone who's not like you might minimize their pain or not believe them, or you would give the benefit of the doubt to someone who's like you. And we have these systems that create, like you said, criteria that end up disproportionately impacting Black bodies. And so it's important for people to understand that it is a both and, that this conversation isn't just about fixing practitioners and caregivers, and
it's about fixing systems too.
Exactly.
And I do have another example that I use of the other of our own internalized biases. One of the things I do is supervise nursing students on maternity wards. So I don't work as a labor and delivery nurse myself anymore, but I do accompany students as they go on the labor and delivery wards and take care of patients, and I supervise my students. And on occasion, I've seen African American fathers removed from the bedside of their laboring partners, and as I reflected on this, I realized in my 20-year career being at the bedside in labor and delivery units all over my city, I've never seen a Caucasian father removed from a labor room. That there are implicit biases within the nurse that interpret the tone of voice, the voice inflection, the voice volume of African American males as threatening, even when it's not, and that can be a manifestation, absolutely a bias that leads them to feel threatened, call security, have folks removed. And even when I've seen the same behavior in Caucasian dads, I've never seen them removed from the laboring bedside.
That's a really good example. I appreciate you giving us kind of an inside look behind the statistics that we're hearing a lot about. I feel like the disparity data has gotten a lot of press lately, but we often don't hear the stories about how that manifests and what that looks like in care.
Right. And that's one of the things I like to do, especially when I'm talking with hospital administrators and those higher level folks, and even with the clinicians themselves who are at the bedside, is to paint that picture of what bias looks like, because, it's not people calling people bad names. That's not what racism in healthcare looks like. It looks totally normal. It looks like you doing your job. It even looks like you being very devoted to your job and doing it with great enthusiasm and passion. It looks that way sometimes. So it's painting that picture of what it looks like, because I can readily recognize it when I see it, and people are just calling it other things.
Right. We could talk a lot longer about all the amazing work that you're doing at Uzazi Village, but also the work that you're catalyzing in the systems that impact the lives and bodies of mothers and babies and African American women in particular. But I'm wondering if you can tell folks how, if they are moved by the work that you're doing, how can they support you? How can they support Uzazi Village?
So if you're local to the Kansas City area, you can come be a volunteer. We do our volunteer training first Saturday of every month. So we have lots of volunteers at Uzazi Village. A lot of folks want to get involved in what we do. We have student interns every semester. They come from local institutions, but they come from across the country too. It's not easy to get maternal infant health specific African American maternal infant health specific experience if that's what you're looking for. So we take internships. Otherwise, our volunteers are involved in just our day-to-day operations. They work in our clothing closet. They work in our clinic. We also, if you're not in the local area, we appreciate our supporters and our donors who donate funds, who do Facebook fundraisers for us, who look at our online wish list and send items that we need for our space, who come visit us. Folks are welcome to come visit us and get a tour and hear the spiel. So we love the input. We interact with folks a lot on social media. We post a lot of pictures of all our events, of all our goings-ons. So we just invite folks to be involved in whatever level they feel led to do so. We always welcome donations, but recently it was MLK Day, and we had a day of service and opened our doors, and about 30 members from our community came, folks who lived right in the neighborhood, folks who were former recipients of our service, staff members, but also folks who lived in the far-flung suburbs. So it was a real mix of individuals who came and served us that day and painted and cleaned and organized and moved furniture, and it was a great day. So folks serve us in all kinds of ways, and we welcome those near and far to come visit us, send a donation, or send us something on our wish list.
And I just want to say I took a tour of the facilities, and the space is beautiful. It's a place that I can feel cares about the people, the families, the women, the babies that come through the doors, and beautiful, beautiful space inside and out. They have a garden and a meditation space. So I encourage you to check them out. The website is uzazivillage.org. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, good. So thank you all for joining us on Raising Equity, where we try to think deeply and critically about issues of equity and identity. And today our focus has been on Uzazi Village, that centers the care of Black mothers and babies and families. So thanks for joining me on Raising Equity.